Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at the last new deck, I guess, from the latest deck build box, that being Blaster's Inferno Dragons. Now Blaster's Inferno is quite an interesting skill because it's very similar to Servant of Dawn and the Noodle reboot skill that we've just gotten. Well, and both of those skills have been seeing quite a bit of success, so logically, you would expect this deck to do something similar. So if we go through the skill, this skill can only be used if all the monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are dragon monsters, and the deck contains one or less level 5 or higher non-fire attribute monster. So basically, anything with 1300 attack or less can be in the deck, that's fine. We can use whatever low levels we want. What this does mean though is anything that has 1400 or more attack does have to be a dragon, and if it's level 5 or higher, it needs to be a fire monster, except for one monster. So this is quite limiting in the sense that we can only have one non-fire boss monster, but it's not the end of the world, right? Choose one face-up level 6 or higher fire attribute normal monster on your field. It gains 600 attack to the end of the turn. Now this part of the effect is very similar to Servant of Dawn, but Servant of Dawn notably does let you boost any normal monster as long as it's the turn that you have summoned out one of the monsters that meets its requirements. So with that skill, we can boost up a 1500 level 4, for example, and have 2 high attack monsters. This forces us to use it on one of our fire attribute normal monsters that's level 6 or higher. But we can use this on turns when the monster wasn't summoned, whereas Servant of Dawn is limited to the turn the monster was summoned. If it was a level 7 monster, we can add a Dragon's Inferno from our deck or our graveyard to our hand once per duel. The Dragon's Inferno is, just our back row hate for dragons. It's fine. If we already have this card in the graveyard, we can basically use it twice. Otherwise, we just get to cheat her out from our deck and then use it to pop something. This is not bad because, again, if we do manage to hit our opponent's trap cards, such as White Ruin, we get massive value. If we don't, it's a little bit more shaky. For our one non-fire high-level monster in the deck, we've gone with Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, and that is because this is, again, one of the best boss monsters in the game. Being able to attack twice is always going to be really, really powerful. It means that we can get in for some massive damage, we can clear through our opponent's set 3 board, and then get some damage in, and it's also just good at taking out multiple monsters, even multiple high attack monsters in the right situation. The Dragius is fantastic. I'd say the main weakness of this deck is that we can only actually play one copy of this card, which we'll come back to a little bit later, but obviously Dragius is our main boss. Our other boss monster is Volcano Attack Dragon. So this is in here because this is the only monster that actually fulfills all of Blaster's Inferno's effect requirements. And that is, it's a normal monster, it's level 6 or higher, it's a dragon, so that means it can fit into the deck, as well as is the only level 7 monster that fits this bill, which means we need to use our skill on Volcano Attack Dragon in order to gain access to our Inferno. But Volcano Attack Dragon is actually not that bad. With this skill, this card can go up to 2900 attack, which is very relevant because it means it can attack over pretty much anything. Obviously, there are some caveats to that. If your opponent has like a 2500 spellcaster and then is sitting behind a curtain of sparks for whatever reason, we can't attack over that. But the most likely combat track we are going to see is the Counter Pigeons, and this card does attack over that because it goes up to 29, it will lose 700 attack because it's level 7, down to 22, and that will still clear a 2100 attack Harpy Lady Sisters. So it's still pretty good from that perspective. And it does also have quite a high defense value. 2000 defense is actually very, very relevant because of exactly Shield and Sword and Sword and Shield. Both of these cards are quite prevalent in the meta right now, so having higher defense monsters is advantageous. So again, Volcano Attack Dragon, really good for that. And our other kind of last boss monster is the Fire Guardian. So this card is pretty good. 2100 attack is basically the best you're going to get on a level 6 monster that isn't a legend, and using our skill we can boost up to 27, which is pretty good. As well as it being level 6, means we can quite easily make a 3 high level monster board, which is pretty good, as well as the fact it's quite consistent in that we can just get this out relatively easily by only having one tribute, which is pretty good. So the rest of the deck is basically gas and then a little bit of aggro. So we'll go over that now. So we have the 2 copies of Seahorse Carrier. This is in here basically to get back our Lamoon because we, once again, cannot use Canang because it's 1400 attack. And basically the only reason to run high defense monsters at the moment is to deal with Pierce. And the only deck that's primarily using Pierce right now is actually the Thunder deck. Most other decks aren't using very many Pierce effects. Therefore having low defense doesn't get punished as much when they're face down. So overall, I'd rather have Lamoon for getting an extra 1200 damage when you need to, rather than having Grace Princess Kana as a high defense monster. Next up, we're on 2 copies of Phoenix Dragon. We can only have 2 copies because It's a limit 3 and we have the Dragius in here, but we can use this to get back our Dragius or get back our Fire Guardian or get back our Volcano Attack Dragon. It's just a really, really strong graveyard toolbox tool, so Phoenix Dragon's always going to make the cut. Then we're on Karibot, and again, this is in here just to give us extra bodies to be tributed off. Karibot obviously does cost 500 life points and does have to be the only monster on the field, but it's just a 3-card engine, which means it fits in quite easily. Next up, 3 copies of Rising Light Angel Essel. But this card is pretty good. It's really, really, really good if we can get out a Dragius with it. Otherwise, it's a little bit lackluster, but still being able to plus and get a body out is still okay. And it's always going to be really useful for that. Plus, milling can be quite good. We are playing the Talismanic Sealer, which wants cards in the graveyard. We do want to get our lights in the graveyard. We do want to get our Karibots in the graveyard. And we even want to get some of our high-level dragons in the graveyard so that we can get them back with Phoenix Dragon. So all in all, milling is quite good for this deck. Next up, we have the aggro portion of the deck. This is 2 copies of Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress and 3 copies of Dragorite. These are in here basically just to beat our muscle. This deck basically is going to win by just attacking your opponent a bunch. It's basically an aggro adjacent type deck, so we want to have big monsters that can get in. And Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress does have 1200 defense, which is actually relevant. That defense does come up quite a lot against your opponent's Lamoons, against a lot of the dragon monsters have quite low attack, so they can't easily get over this as well. Enemy Essels, etc, etc. There is quite a lot that 1200 does actually ward off. And that's kind of it for the monsters. As for the spells, we only have the 1 copy of Dragon's Inferno, and that's because getting the plus off of our skill is pretty good. But other than that, unless you're exactly hitting like Widespread Ruin or Sword and Shield or Buffered Slime, you're not really getting much value out of destroying back row right now. That's kind of the world that we live in, where there aren't enough back row that are high impact that you really want to value putting in a lot of back row hate. So right now, back row hate isn't seeing a ton of play, but still getting that free one is pretty good. And if your opponent only has 1 back row, you might as well get rid of it because it might be a widespread. Then we have Shield and Sword, and again, fantastic legend. You again could replace this with any of the other spell legends, and it would also work just as well. They're kind of different depending on what you need at the time. Our current meta is very low defense oriented. A lot of the best decks right now have 0 defense boss monsters, so Shield and Sword does just let you kind of win some games out of nowhere, which is why we really like it. We actually won a ton of games today off of our Shield and Sword card. But again, any of the other ones are also fine. They're just good for like different situations. Shield and Sword notably is quite bad against a couple of decks, such as Dawn Dinos, which does have quite a lot of high defense monsters. But most of the time, Shield and Sword is really going to be helpful. And then we have 2 Talismanic Sealer. This is our primary way to deal with maximum monsters, as well as just anything else, really. Being able to dump a load of stuff back into our deck is really good, because it lets us reuse our resources, which is really, really powerful, as well as weakening one of your opponent's monsters down is a great way to get some big damage in and deal with one of your opponent's threats. Then we have the Sword and Shield. Again, really good for this deck because we do have high defense monster in Volcano Attack Dragon. So a lot of the time, if your opponent does attack into the Volcano Attack, we can use the Sword and Shield to swap the attack and defense and win that combat, which is pretty good, as well as recycling Shield and Sword is really, really powerful. And then finally, Widespread Ruin is the best trap card in the game. It's insane. It wins games. There's not very much more to say. But this is the list. This deck is okay. I don't think this deck is particularly strong. We haven't really seen this deck being used to any meaningful results in a tournament yet, as well as this deck is very similar to a lot of other decks that have currently come out. There is the Dawn Dino list using the Servant of Dawn skill, which is similar to this in that it has a skill that also gives monsters 600 attack, but that deck can use multiple Dragius and therefore doesn't have to be restricted like this one is. So that already is 1 point for that deck. The generic aggro deck, just playing Hammer Crush Deal, also gets to play 3 Dragius. Now, it doesn't get to boost any of its monsters' attack, but you can just play Trigger Drago or play Ancient Arise Dragon, which can boost up their attack anyway. So that's also kind of a good alternative to this, as well as the new Noodle Ninja deck is also very similar to this. And again, you do get that 600 boost on some of your monsters, but that skill can even plus you every turn with an extra body, which is so much better than Blaster's Inferno. That deck can't use Dragius, but I think does the rest of what the deck's trying to do so much better that it doesn't matter. So this deck kind of feels like, in a sea of skills that are all very similar, and a lot of decks that can be very similar, feels like the weakest of the bunch. And I think that's a little bit of a disappointment. I think if we could run multiple multi-strike Dragon Dragius, maybe this deck would really rise and kind of be very, very strong. But where we're only limited to 1, you basically have to just try and hope you see it. And then once it's in rotation, obviously great, we can keep bringing it back with Phoenix Dragon, we can shuffle the Phoenix Dragons back into a deck with Talismanic Sealer, we can keep reusing it again and again and again. But if we don't see our Dragius, we can't really get the ball rolling, and then we're at the mercy of your opponent's set 3 pass and not being able to break through it, because again, that's the only way we have to get through that. So all in all, this deck, again, isn't bad. It's not bad. It's fine. We went on plenty of good win streaks with this deck. It's putting up results. It's doing okay. It's just not doing it as well as some of the other decks that are very similar. I think that's just my opinion. I think this is maybe a low tier 3 deck. Maybe just a high potential list. I'm not really seeing much out of this, but it's not bad, right? I don't think you could sit here and just say this deck is completely terrible. I think it is fine. It is the definition of okay, fine, satisfactory. It does what it needs to do. It does it an okay amount of the time, and that makes it an okay deck. But let's fire in some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.
ラッシュデュエル 行くよラッシュデュエル